wish I could. I can't do that. Wish I could.
Okay. I'll just stand up.
Right, excuse me. Quiet down, please. Thank you. First of all, quiet down, please. Thanks. Can you hear me at the back? Well, if you're nice and quiet, you might, we'll just see how well we do there. But we're just trying to get the sound right, so you at the back. If not, you might have to sugar down, good old Scots word that, sugar down towards the front. Okay. Now, one wee little bit of in order, the house in-house, if you like, is if we can keep this, especially this section free. There's two reasons. The toilets are there, and the more important reason is, of course, that the camera needs to have a good view of the speakers on the stage, and not just the back of my head crossing in front of it. Okay. So anyway, my name's Jim Houston, and I'm the chair of the Yes Brechin, Be More Brechin Independence Group, if you like. And we're hosting this evening. So welcome to absolutely every single one of you. It's great to see so many here tonight. The weather's been kind, not as warm as we like, but so far it's not been raining, so that's good. I'm so really pleased to see so many independence supporters here in person, because often we just hear about them in the newspapers, if they're in the newspapers, or on television. It's nice that people can come out and just listen. I'm looking forward to tonight. And by the way, this evening is being live streamed, and it's on YouTube. And it's been live on behalf, if you like, of India Live. So we're not just here, we're going further afield. Now we've got a variety of speakers with you tonight, from all parties, from all persuasions, if you like, and if you like, and activists. Okay, so it's why are we here? We're here to try to reinvigorate our independence support, and that starts with you here and me as well. We've got to get going again. So this is the opportunity to hear from a variety of speakers on their ideas, stroke parties, whatever, on how they can see we can take the independence theme and action forward, and especially with something called the general election coming up. Okay. Now tonight on my left is Eva Comrie, and she's going to... Well, there you go. I'll just let you know that wasn't planned, that little bit of... But anyway, it just shows that Eva's come all the way to chair the meeting tonight, which gives me an absolutely great time, because I can sit and enjoy myself as well. But also, she is going to be standing, or she is standing as an independent candidate for the ALBA and Grangemouth constituency. Yeah. And oddly enough, that's a new one, isn't it?
It's a new one, yeah.
It's a new one. So there, that's all to play for. So, give you a quick idea. If there's going to be a fire drill and we're not planning on one, you can get out after me, okay, through there or through there. I'll be going out this one because it's closer, okay. Well, we're not planning on that, but anyway, the exits are to the back and to the front. We're going to this evening. We've got 3 sessions. The first session is where we have our speakers giving their version of what they would like to see the independence movement take forward, and for this general election. There'll be a short interval. Of course, that's to refresh yourselves. It's over there. Stovies are also available if you wish to purchase them. Oh, now you see, don't worry, I can guarantee they're non-fattening. Guarantee they're not fattening. After that, we'll have questions from the floor, but if you don't mind, during the interval, if you come and ask me, I'll give you a nice little postcard. It doesn't say, it's not a picture of Brechin or anything on it, just write down any question that you would like to ask, and we'll hand it up for the second part. So, forgot one more thing. There's a raffle at the back. I hope you'll all be lucky. You can't all be lucky, but hey, have a go. It's well worth it. Right, now, without any more ado, I'm going to step down and I'll hand you over to Eva, who will run the evening for us. So Eva, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
And I'll get started.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, yes, Brechin. On a personal note, it is absolutely invigorating to see so many people here from across the whole independence movement, and I think our movement can be proud that there are so many of us here, ready not just to be invigorated, but to showcase the best of the talent, the experience, the knowledge and the vision of our movement. Each of our speakers is ready to go. Each has been a nationalist or an independence supporter for decades, and their contributions to our country are immeasurable, and in future theirs and yours will continue to be immeasurable, because what we must achieve tonight and every day between now and Independence Day is to ensure that we secure the future of our country as an independent country once more. So I'm pleased to be sitting in front of this banner reminding us all independence is normal. And it is particularly pleasing to be able to celebrate St. George's Day in your company. And all of us look forward to celebrating St. George's Day next year when England is an independent country once more. Now, as we've said, we want to have fun on the road to independence, so I hope there will be some fun times tonight. I won't be the only one cracking the jokes, but our first speaker is Kenny Braes, who is a second-term councillor on Angus Council, having represented both Brechin and Montrose. He's a farming background, and he's going to explain to you how he thinks we should be campaigning in this general election to advance the cause of Scottish independence. Kenny?
Okay, I'll try and project my voice.
Kenny, would you come up on the stage, please? Yes. What we'll do is each of the speakers will speak for a few minutes, and then I think we'll have an opportunity for the speakers to ask each other questions before we then have a break.
Right, so I'm Kenny Braes. I'm an Angus councillor, as said. I represented Brechin for 5 years and then I moved house. So I'm currently representing Montrose.
Could you move the microphone nearer because nobody can hear you?
Just find another cable.
While we're waiting, if everybody that would like to ask a question in the second session could get a card to write their question, that would be really appreciated, please.
start speaking. Can you hear me now?
There's sound coming from here, but it's down low. Can you do something about volume? Say something. Okay,
Is that any better? Right, so,
Thanks, Kenny. Sorry about that. When you go.
right, well, that's just about my 5 minutes up now. Can I go? No. Right, so I'm Kenny Brays, SNP councillor, did a term in Brechin when I lived near here, and now doing a term hopefully in Montrose. Thereafter, well, who knows, maybe our growth. I wouldn't think of going to Forma. An independent supporter for long, long before I was involved in the SNP. I only got involved in the SNP after the 2014 referendum. And I got involved, I actually joined the party because so many people that I'd worked with and a lot of people I'd known all my life just assumed I was in the SNP because I was so passionate about independence. And, you know, a week or two or whatever it was after the referendum, I started getting text messages from friends saying they'd joined the SNP, and so I thought I'd better bite the bullet, and that's what I did. Yes, from a farming background, passionate about farming, and also deeply upset, and I still am, about the fact that we've left the European Union. I think that's an enormous mistake, and it's a mistake that Scotland didn't make. England made that mistake, not us. We wanted to stay. 2/3 of us wanted to stay, but we were dragged out anyway. I feel quite bitter about that, and that just reinforces my determination that we should become an independent country. I'm also a director of the Scottish Independence Foundation, and so I've a bit of a finger on the pulse of the independence movement, because we know what the enthusiasm is by the amount of donations we get and the amount of applications we get for grants, and they're not strong at the moment. People haven't come to us needing £500 to go and get out a street stall, because there's just not very much happening. We've got to change that. I don't have the answers as to how we change that, other than a strong belief that it will change. The wind's gone out of the sails of the independence movement. It's very difficult to just synthesise enthusiasm and vibrancy. But I've no doubt that that will change. Scotland becomes independent when enough Scots want independence badly enough. And the problem is not enough Scots want it badly enough at the moment. So, but that doesn't mean that we have to do nothing and just hang about waiting. And there's some pretty basic things. You've got to make yourselves visible. You've got to make yourselves heard. Little conversations, even if it's at a subliminal level. We all know that we should be doing that. We all know we should be doing more of it. Why aren't we? Well, because we ourselves are lacking a wee bit of enthusiasm. So all that has to change, and events like this gee us up a bit. It's, you know, we often hear that we're preaching to the converted, and it's a waste of time, because everyone in this room is already convinced about independence, so why bother? Well, why bother? We need to enthuse ourselves about this and buoy ourselves up and get out there and start having these conversations again.
That's great, Kenny. It's really, I totally agree with you that we need to be reinvigorated, and it's good to be together with kindred spirits, because we can all rub off on each other, listen to each other and encourage each other along that road. We won't agree on everything, but we agree on the biggest thing, which is our country will become independent again when we all pull together. So I'm looking forward to your questions later on, Kenny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is a writer and blogger, and will not tell me how long he's supported the question of regaining Scotland's independence, but I will worm that number out of him later on tonight. So I'm pleased to be able to ask you to welcome to the stage Mr. Peter Bell.
Forgot my stick. Makes that sound like I'm in for an interrogation later on. I'll take the answer.
Right.
How long? I was born a nationalist. I don't remember a time when I was not a nationalist. Quite honestly, I do not remember a time when I was not a nationalist. I joined the SNP the day I turned 12, and I was a member of the party right up until 2020. No, 2020. And I was more or less driven out of the party, and I'm a bit bitter about that. Good luck to anybody that's trying to reinvigorate me. I said the theme of this event was intended to be how we can use the coming UK general election, Westminster election, to benefit Scotland's cause, as I call it, the independence cause. And I have to tell you, you can't. There's nothing you can do that will benefit Scotland's cause in the election. There is absolutely nothing that you can do. Scotland's electorate will have absolutely no influence over the outcome of that election. There is no outcome that is anything other than disastrous for Scotland. There is no outcome that is anything other than disastrous for Scotland's cause, and we have no way of preventing it. That's what 10 years of inaction has bought us. So, now that you all know that could be just, we might as well all just swear. That's it. No, I'm being honest with you. I've thought this through all sorts of ways, and I have the advantage of thinking it through from a position of independence, a dispassionate position. I'm not beholden to any party or any organisation. There's just me and my wee brain ticking over and reading all the materials and looking at all the stuff and applying a bit of real politic, and I can tell you, there's nothing we can do. Our votes are literally worthless in this coming UK election, perhaps more so than ever. Our votes have always been worthless. People like to say, oh, there were these odd occasions when we got a government that we voted for. I have to tell you, we've never had a government that we voted for. We've had a government where England's electorate happened to vote the same way as us. But it's only because they happened to vote the same way as us that we got that government. We'd never got a government that we actually voted for. And in this election, it's even worse because the outcome is going to be a rabidly British nationalist, or regardless of which party, it will be a rabidly British nationalist UK government sitting in London with a mandate from the people of England to put a choke chain on Scotland and Scotland's independence movement. And when you ask yourself, what can they do? Anything they bloody like, because that's what the union says. The union says they can do anything they like, which is exactly why I say what we should be campaigning for is to end the union. But I thought I was going to bring the meeting to an end early by saying that there's absolutely bugger all we can do. So I thought I better write down a few words, you know, all the way to Brechin, I better say something. All right. You've talked me into it. There are two conversations going on within Scotland's independence movement. One is a conversation which started in 2011-2012, It's a conversation around the thinking that carried us into and through the campaign for the 2014 referendum. That conversation continues to this day. It has not changed in any significant way. The second conversation only really started in 2015. This conversation has been constantly shifting and changing and developing. The first, we'll call it the old conversation, is informed by the circumstances as they were in the period immediately preceding the 2014 referendum, or to be more precise, the circumstances immediately preceding the 2011 election. It relies on the state of knowledge regarding the Constitution, Scotland's constitutional status, which prevailed at that time. The new conversation takes due account of lessons learned from the 2014 referendum and is informed by circumstances as they have transpired over the almost 10 years since the first referendum, as well as by the new information, insights and perspectives that have been developed by numerous individuals, groups and organisations. The old conversation is impoverished, stale, static. The new conversation is rich, fresh, lively. The old conversation is stiff, mechanical, repetitive. The new conversation is flexible, organic, it's kaleidoscopic. The old conversation is largely about the profit and prosperity. The new conversation is about principles and practicalities. The old conversation uses words like permission, negotiation and compromise. The new conversation uses terms such as colonisation, liberation and direct action. The old conversation is about what a wonderful thing independence would be if only we were permitted to have it. The new conversation is about independence being so essential that we must be prepared to take it. The old conversation is about compliance. The new conversation is about defiance. The old conversation puts Westminster at the centre of the constitutional issue. The new conversation puts the people of Scotland at the centre of the constitutional issue. It would be great if this evening's proceedings could be part of the new conversation. I'm sorry if I've taken up too much time.
Rousing words indeed, Peter. Thank you very much. Now, I was going to say the next speaker is a woman who needs little introduction because she's made herself very famous very quickly. She's a former police officer who has declared herself to be an independent for independence candidate in the newly rearranged constituency of Perth and Kinrossshire, Miss Sally Hughes. Part of Sally's reputation in the last few weeks has been strengthened by a series of letters that she's issued, including one to the Chief Constable in relation to the Hate Crime Act. So, well done, Sally.
So the question was, what do we do now to forward the cause of independence for Scotland, particularly in this general election? Well, we fight. We have to fight. This is no longer a case of changing Scotland. This is no longer a choice. This is about saving Scotland.
Yes.
as an independent candidate rather than a party candidate, I have the freedom to use language such as fight. And I'm going to use it. And I'm going to back it up, because I'm not someone that rattles my sabre without being able to back it up. So it was incredibly rousing to hear what Peter Bell said there about us being a colony. We most certainly are. It's not my intention to go to Westminster and play the game. It's not my intention to go to Westminster and be a good little politician. It's an honourable profession, it can be, but the circumstances in Scotland are, this is a state of emergency now. This is my beautiful Scotland, and Perth is at the heart of that for me. We've got to fight, and we don't play by the rules to do that. I look around and I see everything broken, all the things that should be happening, that have happened for centuries, such as banks in the high street, closed. I see a lack of police officers and a lack of common sense in policing from management down. That's just not nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, but it's deliberate nonsense that's imposed upon us. You can't police without police officers. You can't nurse without nurses. These are things these are people skills. And things like that have been broken strategically. And when you look back, all the way there's a chain of brokenness. And it's not just in our country, but for us it's much more focused because of the independence necessity. So I have skill sets from 25 years on the beat that you just don't get out of a book. A little bit of guile goes a long way. And someone said to me, well, what can you do as one single person, Sally? The integrity of one person can never, ever be underestimated, because that's where everything that's worthwhile starts. And it starts from the heart, and it starts with integrity, and it starts with an unswerving determination to get this done. I swear to uphold, to honour and to defend the sovereignty of the people of Scotland, and I will faithfully serve the people of the constituency of Perth and Kinross-shire, and I won't let you down.
But I got a shiver right up my arm and down my spine with your last few words there, Sally, because your dedication, your commitment to our cause are second to none, and I hope you are elected. Thank you, Sally. Our next speaker is a man who has fought for civil rights and human rights and the rights particularly of the disabled for decades. Again, he's been an independent supporter for a very long time, and I invite to the stage to explain his campaign, Allan Petrie.
Thank you, Eva. Aye. How we get independence, like other speakers have said, it's by not following the rules of Westminster. Because one of the biggest rules that Westminster has is that it can change the rules on a whim. We must stop playing by their rules. I mean, even to get into the House of Commons, you have to give up your political beliefs by swearing an oath to a king. Republicanism is a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act, and that must be removed immediately. Now, what we should be doing is looking back into history. Now, my first campaign for independence was with Gordon Wilson when I was 13 years old, when I was delivering leaflets for Gordon. That was a time where you didn't just deliver leaflets. You were out on the streets and you spoke to the public. You had the loud hailers, you had the car cavalcades, you made sure people knew there was an election going on. Just now it's totally different, because they try to pretend there's not an election just to go and capture their own voters. But what we've got to do within a movement is start leaving the party politics at the door, because this is bigger than any individual or any political party. If you look back to 2014, we very nearly got there. Not because of any man, not because of any party, but because the people mobilised, they got fire in their belly, and they come out and fought, and including those within the schemes, because those people are the ones that are going to win this for us. Now, a lot of them just now are saying they're not going out to vote because they don't trust politicians or they don't trust political parties. That is why it is important to have one independent candidate in every single constituency throughout Scotland. Just the one to take on the Unionists. Because the Unionists will defeat us if we split votes. So we require one candidate for independence in every single area. Otherwise, we're hurting ourselves, no one else. For those people that still not got anyone to vote for, we've come up with an idea in Dundee, and we're going to be running with this in Dundee, because Dundee is a radical town. Dundee is the town that sacked Winston Churchill. Dundee made the Lord promise, dance around the Liberty Tree, shouting equality and liberty. So in Dundee, we're saying to people, okay, you don't have anyone to vote for. Stay at home, and you're letting Westminster rule. You're letting them win. Come out and write on your ballot paper, not my Parliament. We sacked Churchill, now we'll sack Westminster. It's time to take a stand. Thank you.
Follow that. Now, our final speaker at this part of the proceedings is a man who worked in the NHS for 25 years, and towards the latter part of his career, he was the nurse director in charge of cancer care in the Royal Marsden in London. He then launched a political career where he became a councillor in Fife and the leader of the SNP group on Fife Council. He was subsequently elected in 2019 as an independent MP and then joined the SNP, and then I was proud to stand with him when ALBA was launched in 2021. Neale Hanvey is, of course, the leader of the ALBA party at Westminster and has some very proud achievements under his belt over the course of the past couple of years, one of which is the obtaining of the opinion from Professor McCorkadale, which put paid to the primacy of the decision of the Supreme Court relative to our entitlement to a referendum. The other is that on the 13th of July 2022, he and Kenny McCaskill gave them Laudy when they were suspended from the House of Commons. So, without further ado, Neale Hanvey, MP, please tell us about the campaign.
Normally I have to stand up to speak, so it's a bit strange speaking from a chair. How many people are content with the current situation that the independence movement finds itself in? So put your hands up if you're happy where we are. Okay. I'm not surprised by that because
I'm happy with the government, yes.
okay, but I'm
The Scottish government.
well, that wasn't quite the question. It's more a reflection of the movement, and I think that all of the speakers up until now have reflected how valuable that movement was in its inclusivity and the camaraderie that we all felt as we went chapping doors in the run-up to the vote in 2014. And so what we have to do, I'll pick up on some of the points that a few of the speakers have made. And Peter made a really important point, is that we can't ask for independence, we have to take independence. And so the question is, how do we get to a position where that is an option? What are the things that we have to satisfy? Now, this general election, I think another point that Peter made, we've had a major outbreak in agreement, funnily enough, over recent, he's been retweeting my tweets, so I take that as agreement, on certain issues, but there are certain things that we disagree on as well. But how do we get to that point where we're able to take independence? Well, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, we need to observe, if we want to meaningfully do that, we have to observe what the principles of democracy. But this general election, I agree that there's nothing that I can see in this general election that will be an immediate solution to the challenge that we face on independence. That is because of a variety of different reasons. The first one is the Supreme Court ruling that was made against the Scottish Government's petition to be able to hold a referendum independently. And the second one is the continued refusal of a Section 30 order over the last decade. And that has been, I think, made very clear by two interventions that I was responsible for in Westminster. And they were both the same intervention, but with very different outcomes. And they were the Scottish Self-Determination Bill. Now, it's a very simple bill. All it says is we should have the same rights to democracy and to decide our constitutional future as exists for the people in the north of Ireland. That's one of the fundamental principles, if you look through the UN Charter, that peoples within a state where there are different peoples, so like Irish and Scottish, should be entitled to equivalent mechanisms to express their desire for things like self-determination. So it's a pretty simple bill. The first time it went through on the nod, I was expecting objections. I didn't expect it to sail through. And the good thing about that is we've actually got a bill. Because it went through, we now have a green bill that sets out that legislation, and that is a document that sets in the parliamentary record. The second time, you'll not be surprised to know that it was Christine Jardine who got up and spoke against the legislation and triggered a division, and the predominantly Labour Party and Lib Dems voted against it, with a few Tories, and one Tory voted in favour of my bill, which I thought was quite good. Quite interesting. But I have to say, just as an aside, there are quite a number of Tories who will say to me privately, we got our Brexit, so why can't you have another vote on independence? And I think there is a spirit within at least the Conservative Party that understand our desire for autonomy very clearly, but they're not in charge. So that's the reason I'm telling you this, is because that explains why it doesn't matter how many MPs we send to Westminster, certainly not ones that are prepared to sit on the green benches and not fight for Scottish self-determination every single day of the week, to take initiatives like Kenny and I did, as Eva referred to gum up the system, to block legislation, to hold up select committee proceedings. All of these initiatives are completely possible. But unfortunately, my former colleagues are not interested in that, and I think that's typified by Tommy Shepherd's comment that he wanted to be a good parliamentarian. I didn't go there to be a good parliamentarian. I went there because in 2019 I wanted that to be the last time that Scotland ever had to send members of Parliament to Westminster. But unfortunately we're having to go through that rather tiresome process again. So there isn't a lot of hope in pressuring Westminster from inside. And certainly the way the numbers are looking for the SNP, that's unlikely to even be a realistic possibility. I think as a movement we need to get our act together and think very seriously about how we organise ourselves for the vote in 2026 in 2 years' time, because what we can't do, and what we've had to put up with for, in my view, that's how it's felt, what we've had to put up with for the last 10 years is a sense that a certain person or a certain party owns the movement for Scottish independence, and that is an absolute fallacy. We demonstrated that very clearly in 2014, that independence belongs to the people of Scotland, and the power for that movement lies in the hands of the Scottish people. And anyone who tries to take ownership of that, or tries to insist that only their way is the best way forward, I think those days are over. What we need to do is to re-energise and give voice to the people in the movement. That's always been my absolute position, because when it comes to 2026, the reason that's so important is because of the UK Supreme Court's decision, because of the refusal of the Scotland Self-Determination Bill, and on the backdrop of Professor Robert McCorquodale's legal opinion, what he makes clear is that the right to choose the type of government for a people, so the peoples of Scotland in that legal context, is for the people to decide and not the state. The state should never set a limit on the UN Charter right to self-determination. Now, because of the UK Supreme Court judgment, and because the Scottish Parliament is a creature of the UK state, we think of it as a Scottish institution. It is not. It's a UK institution. So, because of the action of the UK Supreme Court, they are not even able to give instruction to Westminster that we would want to secede. So that then leaves us in the position that if we get a majority for Scottish independence and we fill Holyrood with a bunch of nationalist MSPs, which has to be our ambition, then even that body is not the correct body under international law to declare UDI, declare secession, and say the union is over. What we then have to do is one additional step, and that is to get all of the Scottish MPs, all of the MSPs, councillors and Civic Scotland, everybody who's got a justifiable claim of being there, to come to a constitutional convention. And it is that convention of the people, it's the people that must be the voice of Scotland to say we secede, we declare independence unilaterally. There is no law against secession. It is absolutely lawful in international law, and that is where the power will come from, and that's why the people are ultimately the most important people in this. But that, being able to achieve that democratic objective is crucial, because, you know, I salute Salvo, I salute every group that does work looking at the constitutional issues. But the fundamental issue is the international community will not entertain us unless we are able to demonstrate that mandate. And there's some good news in all of this. So support for independence is 50+%, and the recent initiative that Ash Regan has been trying to promote in Holyrood, where the people of Scotland are consulted about the powers that they would like their Parliament to hold. When that was first announced, that had 57% support, without any leaflets, without any conversation. So we know the appetite is there. We know the appetite is there for constitutional reform. We know the appetite is there for independence. What we need to do is to collectively get our backsides in gear and deliver that democratic mandate in 2026 or in any other election thereafter to deliver independence for Scotland. We can absolutely do this. The numbers are absolutely in our favour. That's why they're resisting, and that's why we must ignore what Westminster says and continue to fight the fight up here, deliver a nationalist government and administration, a whole Parliament if possible, in Holyrood in 2026. That has to be the main objective. So I'm not saying the Westminster election's a sideshow, but in terms of independence, it doesn't really figure in how we deliver it. It'll be good if we can get lots of nationalists down there, fantastic. But we're in a difficult place. But 2 years later, after 2 years of what will be an absolutely hopeless Labour administration, that should stand us in very good state to reclaim the independence movement and get bums on seats in Holyrood. Thanks.
Jim, would you keep me right here, please? I think the plan was that you were hoping that the speakers would have questions to ask each other.
Yes.
Is that what you want to do just now?
Keep it relatively brief and to the point. That would be excellent. Anybody like to start?
Could I? Right.
power devolved is power retained. So if we go lacklustre into the general election, we fool nobody at in 2026 into thinking that our hearts and our spines are in this fight.
Is that directed to me?
Yes.
So did everybody hear the question? No. Right. What Sally was asking Neale in particular was, isn't it a bit of a red herring to talk about the 2026 election? What really should we be doing in the general election? Because if we don't do much and we go into a Westminster election, we might look a bit lacklustre and our hearts might not appear to be in it, and that might not be a good way to head towards the Scottish election. Would that be fair, Sally? Thanks.
I mean, I understand the point that Sally's making, but that's not the point that I'm making. What I'm saying is that, yeah, go back. The point, it's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there isn't a mechanism available in Westminster other than writing to whoever the Prime Minister is, Sir Keir Starmer, for example, and saying, can we have a Section 30 order, please? That's it. That's all there is. Somebody could have another go with the self-determination bill. Maybe that would get through and the government would adopt it. I think that's highly unlikely. I mean, you've got to put it into context. No Westminster government is going to give up Scotland willingly. And we don't have the numbers. Even if we could return every single seat in Scotland, we don't have the numbers to really put any meaningful pressure on them, particularly if Starmer gets the kind of return that he's potentially looking at because the Tories are disintegrating. So there isn't a mechanism as such, and that's why, and also because if we do it and deliver it in a Scottish election, then we have a better franchise to include all of our friends and neighbours who have settled in Scotland. They'll get a vote. The younger people will get a vote, and they're predominantly in favour of independence. So we really improve our chances of getting a great result. I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, we should be downhearted. I'll certainly be fighting my election as fiercely as I possibly can. And I would say the same to anybody who's standing on a nationalist ticket, that you must do that. Of course, it would be foolish to be half-hearted about it. Nobody that I know who's going to be prepared to put themselves forward in this election will be doing so in a half-hearted way. Well, there might be a few, but let's not go there. So every election is important, but we're not at a position, I don't believe, in terms of the public's mood to get a majority in Westminster that's going to be helpful. And reflecting back over the last 10 years, even though there's been that majority, where's the delivery of Scottish independence? So I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm sorry if I gave that impression. What I'm saying is that we have to keep our eye on that particular route, because that is a route that in law we can deliver a UDI and deliver a claim on independence if we get our act together. That's all the point I'm making.
Neale, I think, Allan, did you want to ask?
Yeah, supplementary question there, Neale.
Yeah.
I mean, we have kids going to school hungry. We have kids going to bed cold because of poverty. Poverty is being increased because of Westminster rules. So is it not the case where we have to still go and take the fight to them?
Yes.
They have their rules, we break their rules, and we bring them down.
Nobody can accuse me of not taking the fight to Westminster. I think one of the quotes that I saw circulating from me recently was that the broad shoulders of the UK that we were told in 2014 are built on the poverty and deprivation of generations of Scots. And that is just a demonstrable fact. And so, of course, I'm motivated by that. And of course, Kenny and I have banged on about fuel poverty ad infinitum. But it's very difficult when the voices that are really listening to you are back home in Scotland and not the ears and on the government benches who just dismiss those concerns. You just have to look at the National Grid have got a modernisation programme that they're rolling out. It's called Beyond 2030. And you look at it, I mean, the goal of them, I went to the launch of this programme, and it's effectively, it's like, if you can imagine the railway network that was built in India or the railway network that was built in Chile to take the riches out of those countries. In the north of Chile, in Antofagasta, there's a sign that says the British government took X million tonnes of silver out of Chile using this railway. And they built the railways to take the riches out, and at the moment, the UK government, under the guise of the National Grid, are building massive infrastructure to take all of the energy from the North Sea down the east coast and straight into the heartland of London and the north and the south east. So, whilst in some respects that's really disheartening, because that's the plunder that's at the heart of the point that you're making, Alan. But the good thing about that is if they build the infrastructure, we can stick a meter at the top of that when we're independent, and we'll be able to charge them straight away.
Peter, you had a question for Neale?
I did, yes. More of a point, but also a question. Neale has a problem, right? He's admitted, he knows that there is no outcome to this election that is any benefit for Scotland or Scotland's cause or Scotland's people. This election, this upcoming election that we're talking about, really doesn't matter for Scotland. It is not important. However, Neale wants to get elected, so he's got to campaign to get elected. And then campaigning to get elected, he's making it look as if it matters. He makes it look as if it's important. That's all right. He's a professional politician these days. That's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. But what about the rest of us? We don't have to treat it as if it's important. If we know it's not important, why do we treat it as if it's important? Actually came up before Allan. This is a case of the same idea arising in two different places, but some months ago, when I was looking at the situation and saying how unimportant, how pointless, as far as the Scottish electorate is concerned, how pointless this UK election is, I somewhat flippantly said, what we should all do is just go to the polls, go to the polling places and write "End the Union" across the ballot. End the Union, because that is the fundamental purpose of our movement. And if enough of us do that, that's sending a message, not just to Westminster. It doesn't matter if you send a message to Westminster, they're not listening anyway. But it's sending a message to the Scotland's own political elite that we've just had enough of this. We're not playing that game anymore. And if only 2% of the electorate across Scotland, it's no use making it a local campaign, it's got to be across Scotland. If only 2%, that's maybe a couple of thousand in each constituency. That's massive. That's massive. That'll be a huge story, because spoiled ballots are usually about 0.5%. So my question for Neale is, how do you reconcile this fact that you know that the election's pointless, but you have to make it look important so as you can get elected?
Well, it's a good line, but it's just it's not true. So in terms of the election, I mean, the point I was making is that there's no vehicle at the end of this to deliver independence because of all of the reasons that I gave. So I was speaking specifically about independence, but if I reflect on my own performance as an MP, that is really important, because when you've got an MP, and this is straight from the stats, so I'm number 72 in the tables for Westminster, number 72 out of 650. But I think it's 60 something of them are ministers. So their stats get artificially inflated because they answer multiple questions every time they appear. So, and this is, I'm using this as reckoning from my office team. I haven't looked at the stats yet. But I'm in the top 3 of Scottish performing MPs. And the reason that I'm happy about that is because I know my team work incredibly hard for constituents. We are absolutely focused on the constituency. We've brought back in £120,000 into the pockets of hard-up people over the, not the whole 5-year term, but we started counting during the pandemic. So for part of the term we've done that. I've done 12,000 constituency cases. We've resolved some of the most complex things, people who have been imprisoned abroad, right through to complex housing cases, but everything else you could imagine in between. So it is important that you get good people who care about their communities, who believe in Scottish independence, who will stand up to whichever unionist party's in charge down there. The point I'm making is that there isn't a magic bullet in this election to deliver Scottish independence because of all of the reasons that I've given.
Thanks, Neale. I'm going to have great pleasure in agreeing and disagreeing with both Peter and Neale. I think this election is really important for Scotland. The reason why it's really important is Westminster needs a signal, a message, and the international community needs a message, and the people of Scotland need hope. What they do not need is a lacklustre campaign towards the 2026 Scottish election, and I would say, although some people in this room will not be happy about it, that the Scottish Government needs a strong message in the context of those who are elected to go to Westminster. And if you cast your mind back to the general election of 2015, when 56 out of 59 Scottish MPs were elected from the SNP, I would imagine that the majority of the population of Scotland firmly believed that Scotland was on the march, and that it would not be long before we celebrated our Independence Day. What would be the feeling within Scotland if at this general election there is elected a majority of MPs who actually support and promote Scottish independence and do not say it is pointless to participate at Westminster? Think of our anti-hero Margaret Thatcher's words: if the Scots want independence, all they have to do is to elect a majority of independence supporting MPs, and you win a majority of MPs, you win a majority of the popular vote, and that stands you in good stead in the international community. And what it also does is it lays down a marker for the 2026 Holyrood election, when you get a majority of independent supporting MPs there, and you bring your MPs and your MSPs together and you create that convention, which will be all the more stronger if those MPs elected in the general election are dedicated independentistas. So it's not just...
How then are you going to manage to get this majority of nationalist MPs in Westminster if you're going to have 2 or maybe even 3 independent supporting candidates in a first past the post system?
But that was the point of the Scotland United campaign, which people will say has now been forgotten and it's gone. It's not gone. It doesn't have to be gone. It's only out of the road if that's what politicians and parties want it to be. Sally, you want to come in there to answer that? I'm conscious also that time is wearing on because we're supposed to have a break and then questions from the audience.
I've been accused by Pete Wishart, no less,
Well done.
of splitting the independence vote in Perth and Kinrossshire. I would say I am the independence vote in Perth and Kinrossshire. For 24 years, Pete has been in the process of settling up down at London, and it doesn't take that long. It really doesn't take that long. 24 years, and he thinks if we give him another 5 years that somehow that will sort it. You have to wear your heart on the sleeve, you have to fight every major battle. right? And when one person wins, if we win Perth and Kinross-shire, the echoes of that will be far bigger than the win that George Galloway had in Englandshire, okay? Because there is a public thirst for this, and it is actually across all of the United Kingdom. It's in England, and it's up here, and it's in Wales, and it's in Northern Ireland. Everybody is sick, fed up of all the parties saying one thing and doing another. They want genuine people in there. They want genuine people who are honourable and capable with life experience and who will not put up with their shit. And that's about fighting. And it's not about going down there in this circumstances and doing the normal thing of reading all the literature and putting bills to Parliament. There is a place for that, and it's not at this moment. You go down there and you create havoc. Yes. And the power of one is in a nursery story. It's when one child laughs at the emperor and says, that emperor's got no clothes on. Yes. That's the power of it. And it's when one person stands up and says, I'm not putting up with this. It's when Mary Balfour does it in Glasgow. It's when John McLean does it outside the factory gates. And it's when you and I go to the ballot, every ballot which is important, and does it at the ballot, says, I'm voting for that person because I believe in them and because they've got it and they're going to do it.
Would you be happy to have the break now? Right, we'll have a break, I think 15 minutes or so.
15, 20 minutes.
15, 20 minutes.
The bars open, there's Stovies. Hello. Right, folks, excuse me. Quieten down, please. That's fine, thank you. That's pretty good. I used to be a head teacher and you've done really well at the assembly. You're quieting down at the right time. Okay, we're just about to start the second session. For those who've given me some of the postcards for the questions, thanks very much. I've handed them to Eva. I've got one I've got to write down because it's coming off the live stream. I'll hand it to you shortly. So I'll get off the stage, do my writing, and we'll get started straight away. Thanks again.
Thank you. I've at least a dozen questions, so I'm going to put them into wee groups, and then whoever wants to answer the questions can obviously come up to one of the mics. I'm looking at you, Peter. So the first group is actually 4 that are all on a similar topic. How are we going to engage and enthuse the young who are pro-India in the main to actually get out and vote? Aye. For those who say we have to wait until 2026, what message would you give families who cannot afford food and heating right now? Again, in a similar vein, what difference do any elections make, all those mandates that we've provided and nothing's been done? And my sadness is the hopelessness and the haplessness of the very vulnerable, represented by a councillor who's here, Councillor Clark. How would we engage with these brothers and sisters who feel that they've been deserted? And Linda and I had a conversation about how women and young mums in particular feel to an extent disenfranchised, and they think that perhaps elections generally, but particularly Westminster, have nothing to offer them. So there's a selection all along similar lines about how do we give people hope and how do we enthuse them to become engaged with the electoral process. So, Allan, thank you.
This is one thing I said earlier on, that people are disenfranchised. They have lost a lot of hope. They don't trust politicians, don't trust political parties. What we've got to do is put fire in the bellies. We've got to let them know that it's no longer about wanting independence, it's about needing independence. Because until we get independence and full control of all our finances, we will all still suffer under poverty. Our most vulnerable will always be ignored. And it's letting them know that they have the power. It's not within the politicians. Politicians only have the power that we give them. We could take that away again. And if they don't have a candidate to vote for that's going to deliver independence, then they can write on their ballots, "Not my parliament," or "End the union." But we must stand together, because only when we stand together will the politicians listen. We employ them, we can sack them. So they need to come out and vote.
I actually want to echo something that Allan touched on there in relation to poverty, because as some of you might know, I live and work in Clackmannanshire, which has some of the worst statistics in the country in respect of poverty, need, want, deprivation, you name it. The vulnerabilities of my local people, who are friends, family, clients, are appalling. And it is only with independence that we will be able to adequately address poverty, because we've clearly not been able to do it with devolution and the limited budget that the Scottish Government has. However, you probably noticed that earlier this week there were statistics issued in respect of alcohol deaths, and unfortunately they're on the increase again. But the most chilling aspect to that is you are 4.3 times more likely to die an alcohol-related death if you live in the most poor communities compared to the most affluent communities. A similar position applies in relation to drugs deaths, but it's far more stark. You're 16 times more likely to die a drug-related death if you live in a poor area than if you live in a more affluent area. Scotland's problem is poverty, and it will not be adequately addressed unless and until we have the powers of independence. And people who are living in these poor circumstances are precisely the folk who have to be encouraged onto the electoral register and have to be given hope and optimism for the future, because Scotland will not flourish until everybody in our country flourishes. Would you like to come in, Peter, in relation to the first 4 questions regarding giving people hope and enthusiasm, please?
Briefly.
Peter, briefly, Bell will now briefly speak, and then Neale.
Very untrustworthy needs these days. The first question was how you engage the young. You don't ask a 73-year-old man how to engage the young. Ask them, and don't get politicians to ask them. Get people their own age to ask them. You know, there are young people in the independence movement. Get them to ask others what they want, and that's how you'll engage the young. It won't be by asking 73-year-old men. 2026, what message? Well, will there be a 2026 Holyrood election? Will there? Can we be absolutely confident that there will be? Of course we can't. No, and even if there is, which I think there probably will be, even if there is, will it be the Holyrood that we know? We know for a fact it won't be the Scottish Parliament that we aspire to, but will it at least be the Holyrood that we know? I doubt that very much, because the incoming British nationalist government, whichever colour of rosette they're wearing, will have had 2 years to put that choke chain on the Scottish Parliament. There'll be a massive transfer of powers to the UK government in Scotland. It'll all go to Queen Elizabeth House. They've got the empty offices there, all sitting ready. So this talk of, it's all going to happen in 2026, apart from anything else, apart from all the time we've already spent being told we have to wait for this and wait for that and wait for the next thing, now we've got to wait for 2026. Well, I have a strong suspicion that 2026 isn't going to be all it's cracked up to be. If we're going to do anything, we have to do it now. Engaging the disenfranchised, disengaged, alienated. Funnily enough, that whole thing about end the union, about repurposing your ballot, after I'd thought about that, I thought about that for the activists. I thought that's something activists can do. And then it occurred to me, well, some of these people who've been disenfranchised and they're disengaged from the democratic process, they might actually be enthused by that idea. No going down and putting a cross beside the name of a candidate like you're supposed to do, like a good British citizen. No, just go down and write what you want across the ballot paper. End the union. So maybe that could get people actually out and going to the polls. Maybe that's something people would like to do. I've more ideas. I'll be back.
I'll try and be swift and brief. So young people, social media, really important way to reach them, but we've got to do a lot of listening before we do any preaching. I think the movement needs to begin a listening campaign to find out what their hopes and aspirations are. In terms of the disenfranchised people who live in areas where the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation is really high. I don't think any of us really understand how far away many of these people are from being engaged with politics, because they have suffered such enormous difficulties over the past decade, and that's largely responsible to poor governance, both north and south of the border, principally south of the border, because all of the decisions down there drive the ability of the Scottish Government to mitigate some of the more pernicious effects. But I think that it would be fair to say that the Scottish Government has been focusing on priorities that don't really reach or reflect the needs of some of those more vulnerable people. And it's regrettable that things like the Scottish Child Payment weren't delivered earlier. Some of the other anti-poverty measures that could have been considered haven't been delivered. I think there needs to be a much bigger focus on that, and also on substance misuse. It's a big problem in my constituency. I work with drug charities in the area all the time, speak to them, go to their drop-in sessions. We have various different groups around Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath where the FAS is one of the local organisations run a drop-in service, and I speak to people who have got substance misuse problems at those meetings, and these guys are so far removed from talking about, they're the very people who need independence, who need the opportunity to be lifted out of the circumstances that they're in. But there's so much poverty, deprivation, trauma, ingrained abuse and neglect, and just myriad complex problems that people aren't getting any ability to deal with. What was the other topic? Just remind me.
Really about how to enthuse and engage people.
Well, I mean, enthuse and engage people, the best way to do that is to get out and chap doors and speak to them. And we did that in great style in the run-up to 2014 vote. We started off with a wee group in Dunfermline, where I was a councillor, and there was, I think, 4 or 5 of us. We started off and we ran a Saturday coffee morning. I think 2 people came. And by the end of the campaign, we had close to 200 people turning up every week to go out on various activities. And that was replicated all across Fife. So we had a North-East Fife group, we had a Kirkcaldy group, we had a Dunfermline group, and we had a Glenrothes group. And we did Super Saturdays, cross-cover across the whole of the area. And so, you know, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to just be bold and get out there and chap doors and get people engaged again. The difficult thing at the moment is we haven't quite got the message that got people out the last time, which was a date and a vote and a purpose. And that's really something that we desperately need. We need an objective. Whatever that objective is that the movement decide, we really need that to get people enthused. But I think we've got to make contact.
You can't have a comment on this if you haven't got a purpose.
I think we would agree that we need an electoral event. People need the opportunity to go to the ballot box, and I think when we have that date, people will naturally be enthused, and the likes of us here will be chapping doors till kingdom come to make sure they're coming out. I like a story Alex Salmon tells about being in Dundee a few weeks before the referendum, and there was a queue of people up the street and round the corner, allegedly hundreds of yards long, but it might have been a slightly apocryphal tale. But Alec had got speaking to somebody in the queue and asked what they were doing, because he said the vote's no for another couple of weeks. And the guy explained, we're not here to vote, we're here to get on the voters' roll, because this is the first time in donkey's years that we have had something worth voting for. And we need to make every election something worth voting for, and that's how we'll change Scotland. The next 2 questions are grouped together because they have similarities. The first is from John McGroarty. What does the panel think of the newly announced Convention on Self-Determination? And does the panel think that policy and process should be discussed in that forum? And on a similar vein from Heather, it is said that the power to enact independence is within the gift of the Scottish Parliament. How can ordinary people pressurise the Scottish Government to dissolve Holyrood and trigger a Scottish election on a mandate for independence following a majority of pro-independence votes? Now, the magic words Constitutional Convention, obviously we've been hearing for a very long time, particularly since, Neale, 31st of January 2020, when Nicola Sturgeon announced that there would be one, and we are still waiting. Why we are still waiting defeats me and probably everybody else here, but I note that the SNP are suggesting that they will deliver a convention after the Westminster general election. My personal view, Neale's view, I suppose the view of everybody in here, is there is no reason on the planet why the convention should not be meeting this weekend. So, who wants to go first on the Convention on Self-Determination, whether they discuss policy and process there, and what can be done to collapse Holyrood and have an early Scottish election? Sally, are you sitting there thinking? Neale, on you go.
Sorry, I'm not hogging the mic, it's just I know the answer to one of them. So Angus McNeil's done a huge amount of work on the new Plan B, and you know, ever creative Angus is determined to deliver independence, and this is one of the issues that he's brought up, and it's pretty straightforward. So at the moment, to dissolve Parliament, either the First Minister has to resign and then precipitate a general election by nobody voting for a new First Minister, which would bring about an election, or the alternative is to change the standing orders of the Scottish Parliament from a two-thirds majority that's required at the moment to trigger a general election in Scotland down to a simple majority, which the SNP and Greens would be able to command. So it's a very simple process. Angus repeats it quite a lot because, I mean, really that is something that we could do tomorrow. In terms of the Constitutional Convention, yeah, let's have one. You know, I made those comments at the beginning of the night. We need to get our act together as a movement, and I think I would prefer that to be led by, not by any political party. I think that's probably one of the big problems I alluded to in an earlier comment, that nobody owns this movement. This is a movement of the people. And so I would like, I mean, it depends who we have. It's not going to be the last chair of the convention, but we need somebody of stature to chair such a meeting. But even a first step of a coming together of the movement would be welcome.
Okay, thanks. On the whether we can collapse the Scottish Parliament and have a fresh election, I have absolutely no doubt that that can be done. And the great thing about that as an idea is that we can pick the time, as long as we've got the numbers in the Scottish Parliament, we can pick the time when we would do that. And you could pretty much do that. I think it would maybe take 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe even 2 or 3 months at the most, because you've got to go through a process, seemingly. You've got to have these votes to try and get a First Minister, which nationalists would scupper every time until the Parliament had to be dissolved. So, and I have absolutely no doubt that we will get our independence through the Scottish Parliament and not through a Parliament that sits in a foreign country in London, England. And I have absolutely no idea how we found ourselves in this situation where we're using their Parliament to try and get independence. There's no other country around the world that's got their independence through a sort of democratic process that's depended on the lords and masters and there, where they sit, all cosy, to make that decision for them. When it comes to a constitutional convention, political parties should have absolutely nothing to do with that, and certainly not the SNP. The SNP has Holyrood where they can sit and do the stuff and do what they want to do, and all other political parties are free to stand for that. That's their place. They get democratically elected to sit there and make decisions. Constitutional convention should be for the people. It should be for all of Scotland, civic Scotland. It needs to involve trade unions, it needs to involve business organisations, and it needs to involve everyone. That's what it's about. That's why it's a constitutional convention, so that the people of Scotland can discuss all these matters, free from the hindrance of party politics. So that's my view on that, and I think it's probably shared by everyone around this table. And here's the thing, all the people around this table, all the speakers here, we've got this much in common and this much that separates us. It's all about processing things, trivial things.
Hello, it's me again. Oh. Hello.
Hiya.
Scottish Parliament extraordinary general election. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen. There's a lead time on these things, and there's already an election slated for March 2026. So the one that's going to run into the other, the timing's wrong. It's pretty much like everything else that's proposed to do, and the independence movement is between 2 and 10 years too late. So I don't hold out much hope for that, and I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what it would achieve anyway, because there's been a lot of talk about, yeah, well, we've got to have a democratic event. Sure, we've got to have a democratic event. We've got to, the people have to vote. That's democracy, but they have to be voting for something. And at the moment, there's nothing for them to vote for. You vote SNP, you're voting for another Section 30 request. What the hell use is that to us? And none of the nominally pro-independence parties actually has spelled out a process by which Scotland's independence will be restored. They haven't done it. Kenny was right, he says it's all about process. Why do you know it's all about process? Because the politicians keep telling us we shouldn't be talking about process. Anything a politician tells you you shouldn't be talking about, that's the thing you should be talking about. I think the previous two speakers misunderstood the question, because I think the question was specifically about the Convention on Self-Determination as it was headlined in the National the other day. So the person who thinks it was, that was... John Groer, was it? Yeah, there, yeah. I think he knows that it's actually not a convention on self-determination. It's another talking shop about policy and visions and blah, 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 blah. Although I've had a wee exchange with Ian Grant, who is from the Independence Foundation. Sorry, the acronyms get me confused. And you know, there's something there. That's fine, but they're not actually talking about self-determination. I got all excited when I thought they were having a convention about self-determination. It is not a constitutional convention, and it's not a national convention. That's a separate thing entirely. And I get a little disturbed about all this talk about cutting the politicians and the political parties out of this national convention. It's talked about. The only way the National Convention can have democratic legitimacy is if it's established by the Scottish Parliament, because the Scottish Parliament is the centre of democratic legitimacy in Scotland. It is the only body that can act for the people of Scotland. It's the only body that we directly elect. All the democratic legitimacy is there, it's not in Westminster, and it can't be with a convention that just brings itself together. So you're cutting out the Parliament and the parties. The parties are the way, they're like trade unions. Trade unions are the way that people exercise collective power in the workplace. Political parties are the way that we exercise power in the area of public policy. The trouble is, the same has happened with the unions. Because most of us couldn't be bothered getting off our arse or getting away from the bar long enough to go to trade union meetings, the trade unions were taken over by certain cliques and vested interests. And the same thing happens with political parties. So they're no longer working for the people, and it's the people's fault. It's always the people's fault, because it's a democracy. And in a democracy, you either get the political party that you want, or you get the political party that you're given. You either get out there and make it what you want, or you accept what somebody else is making it. So the politicians and the political parties have to be involved. This is a finally. Kenny said something about, Kenny said about independence through the Scottish Parliament, and he is absolutely right. How wonderful it is to be able to agree with somebody. He's absolutely right. It's the Scottish Parliament. That's what matters. It's the Scottish Parliament. And people say the Scottish Parliament is just a branch, it's an executive branch of Westminster. It's a British institution. I will remind you, the people of Scotland are sovereign. Our directly elected Parliament is whatever the hell we say it is.
What we learned tonight is that Peter has been campaigning for independence, if you were all listening carefully, for 61 years. Is that right? Allan, were you...
I was out leafleting in Limekilns and Charleston in Fife when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I'm now 73, so...
64. Allan.
On the issue of the Scottish Parliament, we have no chance of pressurising the government to step down, because they know they will find difficulty of getting re-elected. And there's too many of them in there for a wage and not for independence. Yeah. If they want to do something for the independence movement, they have to stop their nonsense with some of the policies they're putting forward. They should take the GRR off the table. They should take the hate crime off the table. They should start giving the people of Scotland hope again. Because only when they start doing things like that and listening to the people will they get the confidence of the Scottish people again. The issue about the Constitutional Convention, the only convention we need is the one from the Scottish Parliament, and that's got to be set up as quickly as possible. And it has to stay away from policies. Because one of the issues that this Constitutional Convention will look at is a written constitution, and politicians should have no say in any of those pieces of legislation, because the written constitution has given us the rights out of the hands of politicians so they cannot interfere with them.
I sincerely hope that our elected politicians are watching this and that some of their spads are watching it and feeding back to them about what the people in this meeting desire, because I strongly suspect that the views that you're hearing here tonight are views that are widely held through the majority of the people of Scotland. We know that opinion polls are showing that there is a majority in favour of Scottish independence. The question is, how will it be delivered as quickly as possible? And just to inject a little element of controversy, here's a good one from Alex Stewart. If you want to send a message and get people fired up, why not campaign to get elected to Westminster and then abstain, like the ISP promote? Would that not send an international message and like the fact... Allan?
A couple of issues with abstentions. Firstly, Ireland is held up as a success for abstentionism. When was a United Ireland on the books? There isn't one. They're partitioned. Only the Republic is independent. So abstentionism didn't work in Ireland. The other issue is if you're standing on a policy of abstentionism and you're elected, you better make sure you're financially well off. Because if you're on any means-tested benefit, every single one of those benefits will stop. Because under the eyes of the law, you have a wage there to pick up. And you're deciding not to do it. So all your benefits will be stopped. So if anybody is really thinking about that and they've got a chance of being elected, think hard.
Kenny and I are, I think, what we call semi-abstentionists. So we take week about. He's down there this week, I was down last week, and that gives us an opportunity to do work in the constituency. The reality is that with the Tories majority, there's no way that we can influence the outcome of a vote. So we took a decision to be semi-abstentionist. But so there's a purpose to that, which is about giving our constituents a better deal. In terms of abstentionism in and of itself, so as a single member of Parliament, is not really of tremendous value, I would say. The real power from abstentionism comes when, say, for example, you had a majority of 56, and it gives you then the power to go down, bang the tables, and say that you want to begin negotiations, and therefore you withdraw. Now, as Allan just said, you need to have a group of people who are prepared to not get paid, and to not get paid for a protracted period of time, although I think it would be reasonable to insist that the same rules that apply for Sinn Féin MPs who don't take their seats, and they still have offices and they still have access to the Palace of Westminster and they still float around. I don't know how much of a payment they get, but they're abstentionists in that they don't swear an oath and they don't take a seat, but they're still active members of Parliament and they run offices in their communities. So there's various different shades of abstentionism. My view is that you become an abstentionist group when you've got the power to say we're withdrawing from this Parliament. That's the time to use abstentionism.
That sounds like what you're saying is if we've got 29 independents supporting MPs elected at the general election, we might then abstain. Peter. Oh, sorry, Sally. Sorry, Sally.
You can't do abstentionism without putting it on the manifesto so that folk, if they vote for it, you've got their full backing. The electorate in Scotland, and certainly in my area, are not there yet. But if you're putting on your manifesto that you're going down there to fight, and you end up disrupting the place to such an extent that they try to jail you, then you've got everybody's attention. I'll leave it at that.
Who's bailing Sally out?
Trouser will fit. Abstentionism. Sorry, electioneering gimmick. It doesn't actually do anything. I remember I'm talking from the perspective of a Scottish nationalist here, an actual Scottish nationalist, somebody who wants to end the Union and restore Scotland's rightful constitutional status. Abstention doesn't achieve anything. It's a bit of political theatre. It's an electioneering gimmick, a bit like make independence the top priority. Who is it that has that on the make independence a top priority? You know the adverts that said it kills up to 100% of household germs. Sounds great, doesn't it? Because it's 100% that you see written there. Up to 100% includes zero. No germs at all. So they could put water in that bottle and it would still be right. Up to 100% germs dead. Just pour water on them. Poor bastards can't swim. Abstentionism. Somebody, right, manifesto. Somebody mentioned manifesto. And that is actually an important point. Because there was talk about Scotland United, which was a daft idea. It was never going to work. It wasn't actually intended to work. It was one of these things that was mooted just to get knocked back. They got the knockback they wanted from the SNP. So, yeah, that was fine. Again, they're only thinking about elections. They're only thinking about the wee sticks that they can get, or preferably big sticks that they can get to beat the other party at elections. Making it a top priority is not... A manifesto for independence. You don't unite all the parties. Electoral compacts and agreements are very fragile. They mostly don't work. They break down. However, just leave all the parties to be as separate as they want. But you have one manifesto for independence, one manifesto commitment that all the pro-independence parties sign up to. so that when you're voting for any pro-independence party, you're voting for that manifesto commitment. And but make sure it's the right manifesto commitment. I'll tell you what that is later. Manifesto for Independence, not Scotland United. Oh, yes.
Being conscious of the time, the next one, why are our current MPs, and there are a few exceptions, not causing disruption in Westminster every day? Does that actually need an answer?
I think Neale would probably be the best person to answer. The thing is, the whole institution is set up so that people won't be allowed to. Oh, sorry. No, I didn't mean to.
You didn't mean to. Neale's going to do that.
Why are they not? It's a really good question, a really important question. It's a question that I've been asking myself for a very long time. So I didn't have the easiest paths to Westminster, but I got there nonetheless. And then when I joined the SNP group, the first question I asked at the end of the first group meeting was, when are we going to talk about independence? And I was laughed at. And noses were shrunk in my direction. And that really, sadly, set the tone for the rest of the time that I was in the party, and I'll not go into a whole lot of other stuff, but one of the key reasons that I spoke up and made the decisions that I did was that I reflected on my experience and thought, if I was, just me back home and this was going on, I'd want to know. I'd want to know that the energy and effort that I imagine is going into the cause of independence is either happening or not happening. And so, I've had a few pelters, but I've no regrets for speaking up. But I can't answer the question why the motivation's not there. Because that was the only reason, the absolutely only reason that I stood for election was to deliver Scottish independence. It's the reason that I continued fighting even after they came for me, because I was not going to be the person that denied the people in my constituency the opportunity to exercise their vote in favour of an independent supporting MP. So I can't answer the background. All I can tell you is I've tried my best to get people to take some action. It's been challenging. I mean, Kenny and I have had a good stab at it, but once you get chucked out, and and we were overly punished, to be frank, because we'd been ejected from the Parliament, and that's a one-day suspension. But they decided to give us a 5-day suspension because poor Sir Lindsay was apoplectic, and I don't think he liked the look he got on social media. Anyway, we're given that punishment. If they do it again, then you can get a really significantly extended suspension, and that we didn't feel that was worth the risk, because it could impact on the activities that we were taking.
This is turning out to be an SNP bashing evening. Simple as that. Hanvey's to blame, it's the SNP to blame. Everybody else is right. So you have no chance of ever coming together again if we start hammering each other and sniping from the sidelines. That's what's happening. And yourself as chair, who's jumped how many ships today to get to where you are, to stand as an independent? Several ships. And you're now standing alone in a little yacht. Simple as that.
I maintain my devotion to the cause of Scottish independence. That is what we all desire in here. Every single one of us wants to see our country liberated. And believe you me, sir, I know that is in your heart too, and that is why we're all here together to motivate each other. Thank you. Allan.
I'll start off by saying this simple thing. Talking facts is not an attack, it is just facts. And I think the answer to the question that was asked can be summed up in the maiden speech of Tommy Shepherd. We are not here to disrupt. We are here to be good parliamentarians.
So you say,
All here for independence first. No matter which party gets us it, we are for independence. We've got to work together. Yes. Independence is the main thing. No party is as important as that.
The cause is bigger than any single individual or any political party, because we're talking about the future destiny of our country, and we want to return to that normal state of independence shown on the banner behind me. And
haven't shown that this evening, Ms. Comrie.
moving swiftly on, James Gill has two questions. His serious one is, what does the panel think is the shortest time before we can achieve independence? 10 years. Sally.
I give it 2 years. I give it 2 years, and we've got to give it everything, because we won't survive if we don't.
Sally, I think you're right. Kenny.
Yeah, I would agree with Sally there. I think 2 years is about the minimum time it could take to get the consent of the Scottish people to our independence. It'll take a good bit longer than that by the time you work it all out and we actually become an independent country. But 2 years would be about the minimum. I think 2 years, if you get elected, Sally, it'll take about 2 years to bust you out of the neck down in London and bring you home. So, yeah, I would agree about 2 years. But the thing is, that's the minimum time. It could take an awful lot longer. But it will come. And, you know, I'd love to think that we can get a democratic event in 2 years, within 2 years, that's going to give us the result that we need, the consent of the Scottish people, for us to become an independent country. We don't need anyone else's consent. We just need the Scottish people's consent to be recognised as an independent country by other countries. That's when you truly become independent. Because if you aren't recognised as an independent country and you declare a UDI and nobody around the world acknowledges it or respects it, well, you're not going to be able to do anything with that independence except go down the stank. You have to be able to trade with other countries. You need to be able to make treaties with other countries, because if you don't, we'll find ourselves like Albania. Countries become independent, one, when the people want to be independent, and two, when other countries around the globe recognise them as such. And that's a really small step. This is something that's kind of lost. You know, and I'm maybe as guilty as anyone. I get a wee bit cringy when I see too much shortbread tins all bedecked in tartan, you know. But Scotland is recognised around the world as a country. It's a pretty small step to be recognised as an independent country. And I don't think we would have a problem at all getting recognised as an independent country once we get a majority of Scottish people to vote for that, to give consent to Scotland being an independent country. The rest of it's kind of all going to be a matter of process. And that will take time. But the first thing is to get the consent of the Scottish people, and we have to keep working away at that. And we've got Denise Finlay there. Stand up, Denise, please, and show everyone your phone with this magical app. We've got Denise has got an app on her phone there. She'll share it with you for nothing. And it's for signing up people to independence, getting their name, getting their address, so that we can make sure that they vote come the time. Or I may be misquoting that there, but that's the spirit of it.
Have voter ID, and this app will sign everyone up.
Okay, thank you.
Answer that question in the shortest time that independence could be restored. The only sensible answer to that is it all depends, because it all depends on what happens in the interim. What I can say is that if everybody does as I tell them, it could be within a couple of years, but nobody's going to do what I tell them. So, if the coming UK Parliament election is made a de facto referendum on the powers of the Scottish Parliament, not transferred powers from Westminster, the actual powers that the Parliament takes, that's the game changer. That's the game changer. You get that mandate, the Parliament asserts its competence in the area of the Constitution, which is actually a de facto UDI. It challenges the British state, defies the British state to challenge them in court, which the British state probably won't, because of the arguments that they will have to make in court would be very embarrassing for them. They'd have to argue that Scotland is not a nation, etc. So it all depends on the process that we go through, and you make it a human rights issue. You make it initially not about independence, but about a right of self-determination, which is a human right. It's defined by the UN as a human right. So you make it about that first, and that way you get the international community on board. If you say that you're declaring UDI through the Parliament is asserting its competence in the area, because that is the only way that the Scottish people can exercise the right of self-determination, then you've got the whole international community on board, because nobody can deny the right of self-determination. If it's done that way, it could be within a couple of years. But what we should be more concerned about is what is the limit in the time? What is the day by which, if we don't do it, it's not going to happen? And I think that day is not so very far off. But one thing and another is going to come together. There's going to be legislation, there's going to be constitutional changes at the UK level. Just think of it this way. The UK government has the power to simply rewrite the Constitution and change Scotland's constitutional status and give us, impose on us the same constitutional status as Catalonia has in Spain. So that campaigning for independence, voting for independence, it would actually be illegal. Thanks,
Peter. I don't want to be too
I'm sorry,
pessimistic,
once I start.
we want to look towards independence actually happening, so I think we're saying we need a quick, short time
You
scale.
also have to be aware that there is a time limit on it. There is a point at which it becomes, for all practical purposes, impossible. So you have to get off your arses and make it happen sooner rather than later.
That's why in 2021 we spoke about the urgent necessity of independence and prioritising that one aim. The second question from James Gill was less serious. It probably doesn't require anybody to come here to answer it, because I'm conscious of the time. It was, once in Solihull, I got the comment from an English person that we ought to rebuild Hadrian's Wall. Should we now be in negotiations with Northumberland? I think finally everybody's got a wee ballot paper to vote for and against what you've heard from Kenny, Peter, Sally, Allan and Neale. I'm not sure if somebody's going to collect and count these or if...
Grade it, or is it just yes, no?
There's for or against, so whatever you think from what you've heard. Would that be fair, Jim? Are you going to announce the result tonight? If we can announce the result tonight, we will. But if not, thanks everybody for your attendance. I hope you're invigorated and looking forward to continuing to campaign.
Before you go, it's time for me to say a few words of thanks. Excuse me, a few words of thanks. I've enjoyed tonight, I hope you have. It's been lively at times, which is good because I didn't see anybody nod off, so that's good. That's a big plus. I'd like to say, I hope everybody, whether you've been in this hall, in this pub, or hotel, or whether you're on YouTube, I hope you've enjoyed taking part in the discussion, listening to the discussion, because it's something that we have to do and keep on doing. Because if we don't, the dream will begin to dissipate. Now, I hope you're itching to get out there and convince your friends, family, neighbours, and even the stranger in the street, but don't get arrested for it, please. But let's make sure that the independence message gets out there as often as we can. First of all, I'd like to say some thanks. I'd like to say a big thank you to Eva, who's chaired tonight. So well done, Eva. No mean task when you see the quality of the speakers in front of me and in front of you. And I'd like to say big thanks to Sally and Allan and Kenny and Peter and of course Neale for all your contributions. They were excellent and they kept it going throughout the evening. So well done, thank you. Now it comes to maybe not the stars of the show, but equally important folk. And one is GH Argyll Productions, and they're the folk who have allowed and made the whole thing, the live stream thing, possible, and they've come quite a distance to do that. So thanks, lads. Oh, and by the way, I've been told to say that Independence Live has got a crowdfunding site, so don't be scared. Go and have a look. Okay. I'd also like to say to a big round of applause, definitely for these two. It's Natalie and for Steve at the Caledonian Hotel who've looked after us so well. And you might not realise it, but they're not usually open on a Tuesday night, so it's a special thing they put on for us. Okay, time to wind up. Can I just say personally, and from all of Yes Brechin and Be More Brechin, thank you all for coming, taking part of tonight. It's been great. Don't forget to check your raffle tickets. Okay. So therefore, once again, thanks for coming, and I wish you all a safe journey home. Thanks very much. To go down there. He wasn't listening, was he? Oh, it's the speaker still on. Right. Keep forgetting. Right. I'll go that way. I'll be doing it going round. See you later, guys. I just want to see if I can get a picture.
That was really nice to meet you.
Really enjoyed that.
Hope to see you again.
Sitting round the table.
Eh?
It's good sitting round the